For the Big East, Mark Rogers TV continuing our series looking at all the BCS conferences and the best matchups non-conference this fall coming up in college football. We've checked out the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Big 12. Now we turn our attention to the Big East, or at least what's left of the Big East in college football. Of course, the basketball-only playing schools have kept the identity, the name, the logo, the title, everything stays with those basketball playing schools. The football playing schools, or at least what's left of them, have kind of gathered up the rest of Conference USA. They will play one more season in 2013 as the Big East before a lot of schools depart. Of course, Pitt and Syracuse already have left for the ACC. Louisville is next in 2014. Rutgers on to the Big Ten, and then it's going to be new logo, new name, new title, new identity for most of that Big East foundation coming up in 2014. So it's one more season for what we consider to be the Big East in football. First, a couple numbers that may surprise you considering the reputation that the Big East has as the worst of the 6 BCS conferences, and certainly we agree in regards to football playing over the past 13 years in the BCS era. But it's a bit surprising that since 2006 that the Big East has posted the 3rd best non-conference record among the 6 BCS conferences. Now, that would have to be explained, and of course we would have to do what we did with last season's schedule. If you check out some of our posts where we took each BCS conference and lined it up in terms of not just the record, but looked at the opponents and how good those opponents were, and games against top 25 and top 10 teams. And certainly the Big East has shied away from those type of contests traditionally. But since the BCS era began in 1998, and of course the Big East was a little bit later than that, the Big East at 46-29, surprisingly, very surprisingly, has the best bowl winning percentage. Again, that can be explained because the SEC and the Big Ten in particular play each other a lot. They play much better competition. Certainly the same could be said for the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and the other BCS conferences rather than the Big East. But on paper, black and white, best bowl winning percentage at 46-29 since the BCS era began. Okay, let's turn our attention to 2013. And the Big 12 could learn from the Big East here because we knocked the Big 12 non-conference schedule. Not a whole lot of matchups there besides Oklahoma-Notre Dame and a few other decent matchups like Oklahoma State and Mississippi State. But for the Big East, hey, give it up for the Big East. They've got games against Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, TCU, Texas Tech, a decent game against BYU as well, and Fresno State and Arkansas out of the SEC. So the Big East goes out in style, at least in regards to the competition. We'll see how they play coming up this fall. So we're running down each member and its best non-conference game, and we start with a really good one with UConn 5-7 in 2012, taking on Michigan. 8-5 last season, but certainly this Wolverine team was one of the top 15 or 20 teams in the country despite the 5 losses. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Alabama, they lost to Nebraska as well, and South Carolina, one of the 10 best teams in the country on the last play of the game at the Outback Bowl. So Michigan loaded at 8-5, and they come back much stronger with Devin Gardner at quarterback. Let's talk about Connecticut because we've touched upon Michigan and what they've got returning in our Big Ten post. You've got a new offensive coordinator for UConn and TJ Weist. He's got 8 returning starters. I don't necessarily know if that's good news for the Huskies since they scored 17 points per game. And considering the way college football is played in 2012 and 2013, 17 points per game is basically like single digits was 10 or 15 years ago. The offensive line for the Huskies ranked 100th nationally in giving up sacks. They do have a playmaker coming back in running back Lyle McCombs, but whether he gets some space to make some things happen is yet to be seen. Again, it's Michigan, it's UConn coming up on September 21st with UConn at 5-7, actually hosting that game against Michigan. Another big matchup for the what we could consider Conference USA. Actually, it's the Big East, but with a lot of old Conference USA matchups. We've got South Florida, a 3-9 team last year, going to Michigan State to take on the Spartans, who had a down year at 7-6. New head coach there at South Florida is Willie Taggart, taking over for the departed Skip Holtz. He's got a 4-year starting quarterback, actually in B.J. Daniels, who's gone. So B.J. Daniels did not finish what was really a strong career where he went to a lot of postseason games for South Florida, but as a senior, 3-9, but he's out, and he's going to be replaced either by senior Bobby Eveld or sophomore Matt Floyd. The early returns on Floyd and Eveld, not good for South Florida, and Taggart because they've thrown 3 touchdowns and 12 picks. But that's the big game. Non-conference for South Florida. It's against Michigan State in East Lansing, where the Spartans were 7-6 last season, and themselves will try to build an offense after a dismal 2012 with Andrew Maxwell at quarterback. Of course, Le'Veon Bell off to the NFL's Pittsburgh Steelers. Michigan State built for defense, and that should be the case again in 2013. One of the best in the country, but struggling to score points, and we expect that to be the same for the Spartans in 2013. All right, we've got Central Florida at 10-4, a team that made it to the Conference USA Championship game, taking on Penn State and also South Carolina. Central Florida and head coach George O'Leary will tackle Penn State and South Carolina. Of course, the Nittany Lions went 8-4 after losing their first 2 ball games. Bill O'Brien did a remarkable job in Happy Valley, establishing a passing offense, really schematically out-coaching the Big Ten in many ways in taking a pedestrian Penn State offense and making it the #1 passing offense in the Big Ten. For South Carolina, we talk about one of the best 10 teams in the country last season, of course. They lose all sorts of NFL-type talent on defense, but they bring back Connor Shaw at quarterback, although he missed spring football, and another quarterback in Dylan Thompson, who looked really good at the end of the season in throwing 3 touchdowns and 310 yards against Clemson. For Central Florida, it's Blake Bartles at quarterback coming back. We had a bowl post after the bowl win about Bortles. Talked a lot about him coming back after 25 touchdown passes thrown in 2012. Running back is Storm Johnson, a Miami transfer who ran for 500 yards. So again, it's Central Florida taking on both Penn State and South Florida. Central Florida will have to be up to the challenge there. SMU's got a couple of tough opponents as well out of the Southeast, what used to be the Southwestern Conference actually, but is now the Big 12, of course, in TCU and Texas Tech. Tech coming off an 8-5 campaign, TCU 7-6 after losing to Michigan State in a bowl game, but 2 very formidable opponents for SMU. It's coming off a 10-3 season. June Jones has really established this program. They won a big Hawaii bowl game against Fresno State, 43-10, but it could be a step or 2 back in 2013. They lost 6 all-conference performers, did June Jones. 6 of those guys gone, and they will have to line it up against TCU and Texas Tech. Should not be pretty for SMU early on. Week 1, we've got an August 29th matchup with Temple at Notre Dame. The Owls at 4-7 did not generate much offense at all. One of the worst offenses in major college football. Held under 20 points 7 of 11 games and going 4-7. They've got quarterbacks in Chris Coyer and Clinton Granger. Those guys accounted for 10, count them, 10 total touchdown passes the entire season, and just 121 yards passing for a Temple offense that, albeit relied on the ground game, still 121 yards passing, not good for the Owls as they go to Notre Dame. And despite the loss of Manti Te'o and some other performers on defense, of course, Notre Dame's going to be extremely strong on defense as they look to fill that quarterback position with probably Tommy Reese, the senior, this fall. September 27th, we've got Duke at Memphis. Sounds like a great basketball game. Duke coming off its first bowl appearance since 1994 under head coach David Cutcliffe. But their quarterback, Sean Renfrey, one of the best in the ACC, off to the NFL. He was drafted in the 6th round. Memphis, we talk about bad offenses with Temple and UConn. And Memphis right there at 4-8 last season. Although they did win their last 3 games, the Tigers accounted for just 318 yards per game on offense. That's Duke, Memphis. Memphis's toughest non-conference foe in taking on the ACC's Blue Devils on September 27th. All right, another Week 1 matchup. August 31st at Cincinnati hosting Purdue. The Boilers at 6-7. They lost their coach. Danny Hope actually jettisoned him out of West Lafayette and replaced him with one of the up-and-comers in college football, Darrell Hazel out of Kent State, who took the Golden Flashes to a 12-2 campaign for Purdue. Of course, They have a quarterback battle after losing their two top quarterbacks from 2012, and it should be a 4-quarterback competition in August in West Lafayette. Okay, for Cincinnati, of course, Gunnar Kiel, the big name, but he won't be eligible to play until 2014 at quarterback after transferring from Notre Dame. They've got quarterbacks in Amunchi Logo and Brendan Kay, 4 offensive linemen back for Cincinnati, including 2 all-Big East performers. They did lose 7 starters on defense after giving up 253 yards passing per game. I think the good news here for Cincinnati coming off a 10-win campaign is Tommy Tuberville in place as head coach. He certainly proved to be a winner at Ole Miss, then Auburn, then maybe not so much at Texas Tech, but in particular really turned around Auburn in the early 2000s into the mid-2000s there at Auburn. Okay, on October 19th, we've got Houston taking on BYU. The Cougars at 5-7 last season after losing both quarterback and coach from the season before. Kevin Sumlin, of course, moving on to College Station, Texas A&M, and Houston goes 5-7 in its first season after Sumlin taking on BYU on October 19th. The Cougars went 8-5 last season. Defensively, the Cougars were a mess last season, 36 points given up per game, 107th in third down efficiency. Everybody converted on third down against Houston. They gave up almost 500 yards per game at 483. The quarterback is David Pyland, and running back is Charles Sims, who, despite injury issues in 2012, proved to be one of the most explosive backs and should be that in the Big East. Charles Sims of Houston, remember the name, in 2013, Big East fans. All right, August 29th for Rutgers, a 9-4 football team last season, taking on Fresno State. They've got also another really big game against Arkansas at 4-8. We know the Hogs, of course, one of the worst teams last season in the SEC, but it's still, anytime you play and beat somebody from the SEC like Rutgers did last year in defeating the Razorbacks 35-26, now they've got the Razorbacks at home, and again, they travel to Fresno State, a 9-4 team were the Bulldogs in 2012. Rutgers offense bad, defense great in 2012. That's pretty much the way it shook out. It was very black and white for Rutgers. They do return their starting quarterback, Gary Nova, but not an extremely explosive or dynamic player. They've got just 4 returning starters on defense. So the defense has been really good, but will be tested with 7 lost starters coming back this fall. Jawan Jameson, the only heartbeat on offense for Rutgers last season, onto the NFL at running back. He will be replaced by Savon Huggins. And finally, we've got the best of the bunch in the Big East, the team that really showed up and put up the one marquee win for the conference last season. That was Louisville, of course, in a stunner at the Sugar Bowl over Florida. Louisville went 11-2 last season. Their biggest non-conference foe, it's only 2-10 Kentucky, but it is out of the SEC, and it is, of course, an in-state rival. That game coming up on September 14th against, again, Louisville at Kentucky. The big pluses, of course, at quarterback and at head coach for Louisville. Charlie Strong, one of the best in the land, one of the up-and-comers, really recruiting guys, really coaching them up and doing a great job at Louisville, and he, of course, is a hot commodity. As well as Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback as a sophomore, proved to be the best player on the field against Florida in New Orleans, and also had a remarkable season and really toughed it out with serious injuries to a shoulder, to an ankle, and an elbow late last season, and carrying it through and making sure he made every start for the Cardinals down the stretch. Not all is rosy, though, for the Cardinals. They've got some things to shore up here. They lost their 2 best offensive linemen. They also had a run game last season that produced just 123 yards per game. They were last in the Big East defensively in creating sacks and tackles for loss in the backfield. And also, listen to these special teams issues. The Louisville punt return game was the 2nd worst in the country. The punt return game worst in the Big East. So that's the punt net by the punter was 2nd worst in the NCAA. The punt returns the worst in the Big East. And the kickoff return. So no special teams, no hidden yardage here. The kickoff return for Louisville, the 3rd worst in college football. So those are the big matchups for the Big East coming up in its finale in 2013. And again, we credit the conference for coming up with some